Hi, this is Scott Bogren, Editor-in-Chief of Rail Magazine, and I'd like to welcome you to this video on our 36th edition of Rail Magazine.
And I'm editor Rich Sampson, and this issue we're taking a look back at some of our favorite or recent stories that have appeared in past issues of Rail Magazine and kind of updating what's happened recently, some of the trends, both in those communities and across the industry, across all of North America, and kind of reinforcing some of the themes that have always been part of Rail Magazine from our first few issues when we really took a focus on the intersection of land use and development along with passenger rail, issues of accessibility in terms of affordability and also physical access to stations, how different modes come together at historical stations, all these kind of wrapping and paralleling across a bunch of stories. And we're coming back to see where some of those places are now that a few years have passed, or even maybe a decade. So we take a look at 4 different communities across the country, and then we have a couple of different broader pieces on how both transit-oriented development and accessibility play in terms of trends nationwide.
Yeah, we thought that the first 2 kind of pieces that we hit you with out of the box, the 2 rail yards, are commentary pieces, and it's fascinating that these both come from non-transit, non-passenger rail advocates, but they kind of speak to some of the central tenets of our magazine. And in addition, where we are kind of taking a look back and we're using the thrilling wonder stories of yesteryear, what we really see in these 2 pieces is kind of a reinforcement. The first one comes from a world leader in real estate development, Cushman & Wakefield, and speaks to from the real estate developer's perspective, what TOD means and how it impacts the value of land. And I think just as importantly, you can see within the study the understanding, the realization that, yes, it does cost a little more from an infrastructure perspective to build TOD type developments, but the price premiums you get on the outside, on the out years, more than make up for it, which is something we've said all along for years.
Yeah, and if you look back to the pages of this magazine when we first started in the early 2000s, it was more predictive on this is what developers will be looking for.
Yeah.
And now this is what they are looking for and have seen across the country. And we see that in projects like Sunrail in Florida, which we'll talk about soon, which that particular real estate firm has worked with over the past couple of years.
Yeah, and then the other rail yard piece that we have, which I also would like to really point you to, is a University of Minnesota study on accessibility to jobs. And it's really a focus on how 46 of the top 50 cities in the country, how access to jobs is affected by varying forms of transit. And in many of these cities, obviously, that form of transit is passenger rail of varying forms and modes. And it really looks at how you can adjust for frequencies of services, how you can adjust for the time of trips, and how that can change the impact of a service, and how that can bring in more jobs and job opportunities, and also more riders and employees. And what this really speaks to from a more global perspective is that central economic output and impact of good passenger rail is getting people to work and keeping employers in communities, building the economics of communities.
Yeah, and Scott, one of the feature stories that you wrote kind of ties both these aspects of land use and accessibility to jobs together in one massive facility, the Transbay Terminal in San Francisco, which we first profiled back in 2008.
Yep.
And you've kind of updated here. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, that was a fun one. It's hard to impart how impressed I am with what they're doing there. I used a famous quote at the start of the article that you'll see, Daniel Burnham's famous quote about, make no small plans. And this is truly that theory in practice. It's the only facility of its kind with this grandiose ambitions that a city has chosen to build in what, 50 years?
Yeah,
Maybe more than that.
Certainly.
Yeah. So what we have is a large scale, multimodal transit facility going in the heart of a economically vital neighborhood, downtown San Francisco, connects 10 different forms of public and community transportation, rail and bus, all within the confines of a building. There's a 5-acre park going to be built on the roof of this building, and then the redevelopment zone around it includes some of the most huge building, the largest office tower on the West Coast is a part of this. So truly no small plans. And when we wrote about this in 2008, the phrase had kind of initially been coined. This will be the Grand Central Terminal of the West, and there were hopes that it would be done by now, and it's not. It's coming out of the ground, and there's still a lot of political infighting, between developers and the city. There's still a lot of issues to work out. Some of the designs have been changed, and we update on that. But the principles, the foundational elements in what this Transbay Transit Center means have not changed at all. And time may take longer than they had hoped. And when it takes longer, it usually costs a little more as well. But within that, we will see this. Hopefully, they're looking towards 2017 now. It may get delayed a little further, but sooner rather than later, we are going to see one of the most impressive multimodal transit facilities built in North America in the last century.
Yeah, and looking at a region that's kind of gone through a lot of those types of similar battles on a regional network scale instead of just one building is the Denver region, as it kind of implements its regional rail network. They have a pretty robust and well built out light rail network. Now they're adding a commuter rail, or more accurately, a regional rail network to serve the airport, serve communities north and west of Denver. That's all going to be electrified. That's the first time we'll have electrified non-light rail or subway service west of the Mississippi, actually.
Wow.
So it's kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
They'll be opening a whole bunch of these lines by 2016. They've just recently reopened Union Station after a several-year revitalization effort, and that will be the hub, not only the light rail and commuter rail network, but a larger redevelopment district right downtown. New stations at the airport, which is going to have its own architectural flair. And you'll hear kind of about the process that the RTD in Denver and all the various leaders in the area went about to overcome funding shortfalls as the recession hit and projected sales tax levels didn't quite meet expectations. So that's kind of a process that we're seeing unfolding right now with the Transbay Terminal in San Francisco. So these things aren't just localized to one area, but kind of spill over between regions.
No, I remember the last time I was in Denver was at an event at Union Station back in, that was what, 2008?
Mm-hmm.
So I probably wouldn't even recognize it today.
It's a little different.
Yeah.
And Scott's been following a story much further south and east, the Sunrail commuter rail system in and around Orlando.
Yeah, Sunrail is Central Florida's first real rail system, and we were excited to see it come online in May of this year. And we had written about it previously 2 years ago in 2012. So the look back now is, okay, we talked about kind of what it might look like. We kind of had an idea at that point of what the rolling stock was going to look like, and certainly plans were already well in place for where the stations were going to be, but it's all operational now. Mm-hmm. And 31 miles and 12 stations along the track, along the line that kind of bisects the city, if there is a city in Orlando, but certainly the region. And ridership really peaked initially and was very heavy. It slowed down a little bit recently. They're taking some steps to try to boost that back up. But a couple of key factors that I just wanted to relate here. One, the system understands that this is a multi-year assessment, and you shouldn't gauge any rail project in 2 or 3 months. Two, there's going to be huge there is a huge construction project along Interstate 4, which parallels the line on certain parts, but also runs through the heart of the Orlando region. 21 miles are going to be literally torn up. So having this system there as a relief valve for a lot of congestion, I think is going to be critical. They've also done some great things with building within the framework of the business community and building some partners there. They're looking at moving perhaps by 2020 out to Orlando International Airport, which is the 13th busiest airport in the country. And lastly, they're showing some flexibility that you don't always see. And I kind of finished the piece with a little vignette about how a couple of stations that were we thought in 2012 key to ridership growth that were based on medical facilities. And it turns out that most of the employees there were working a 7 to 7 shift, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., and that 7:15 or 7:20 last train did not give them enough time. And kudos to the people running Sunrail and the leadership there for being able to be flexible enough to move that back 15 minutes, 20 minutes at each of those stations, and thus increase ridership. It's the kind of stuff we like to see.
Yeah, and that experience only reinforces the importance, if a region can, to purchase the rail corridor. And their ability to change it on the fly like that was directly related to their ownership of that rail line, a key fact, especially for commuter rail. And lastly, I kind of did a tour of Canada. Since our second or third issue, we've been covering passenger rail transit across Canada in many of our issues, and we've had two entirely dedicated issues to Canada. So this is a kind of east to west tour from Montreal to Vancouver of every city that's currently operating rail transit. We don't get so much into the inner city this time, but we look at kind of big regions in Montreal and Toronto and Vancouver, and then smaller Canadian cities like Calgary, Edmonton, Mississauga, Hamilton, and Kitchener that are all planning light rail systems. And they do it just a little differently. There's not as big of a federal role in Canada, more of a provincial leadership, and then local regions kind of banding together between cities and county and that type of level to get these projects moving forward. So a pretty exhaustive look at rail across Canada, and it'll be a focus that continues for our magazine. We all like talking about Canada, and they do things just a slight bit different than we do here in the States, but still good lessons that people here can take out.
Yeah, it's a really impressive array of services from Vancouver east to Montreal. There's a lot of good innovation and new systems starting up and building, and just like we're building this issue on successes of previous issues and talking about that, you can see a lot of that in Canada when you talk about Edmonton and Calgary, how they're really building off of successful systems, and that's the place where you really like to see that. Rail has to be a process that it doesn't ever end. You've got to always be building the network and tweaking things as opposed to just putting track down and then never looking back at it. So it's really nice to see that in Canada.
Yeah, and so those are kind of the main focus areas of our feature pieces. Scott also recently was in Portland with some of our association's board members, did a little trip there, and kind of spoke about the perceptions outsiders might have of Portland.
Always impressive. I mean, I hadn't been to Portland recently, and to be back and to ride the system extensively and get some really good tours from the good folks at TriMet, seeing the bus service and all the people. It's just the ability for transit and mobility to equate to the vitality and livability of that city and community and region. It's impressive. Yeah.
So that's our 36th issue of Rail Magazine, Thrilling Wonder Stories Revisited, and we hope you enjoy this issue. Please take some time to follow up with us by Twitter, certainly, Rail Mag on Twitter, or you can email me at sampson@cta.org.
And I'm available at Bogren, Bogren, @cta.org. And thanks for being a Rail reader, and we hope you enjoy this edition of the magazine.